W special meeting, June 21st, 2012. The time is 6:07 p.m. You can join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The roll, please. Commissioner Cardwell?
Yes.
Commissioner Holloway? Present. Commissioner Kemper?
Here.
Commissioner Sterling?
Here.
Commissioner Kivo? Present. All commissioners are present. Thank you. And if the attendees in the audience could please introduce yourselves.
David Blair, right here.
Sue Tapp, right there. Karen Syke.
Cindy Lewis Wolfram, right here.
Daniel Poland, right there.
Betty Johnson, Clackamas Riverwater. Excuse me, I do the resident of Clackamas Riverwater.
Bob Gregorio, Sunrise Park.
Wade happened with the Sunrise Fund.
Molly Harbacher, the Oregonian.
Warren Mitchell, right there.
Melissa Franklin, Clackamas Riverwater.
Paul Elsner, South Fork Water District.
Harry White, Clackamas Riverwater.
John Slide, Clackamas Riverwater.
Jerry Marchant, Clackamas Riverwater.
Don Vineyard, Clackamas Water.
Kamkia Wunam, Clackamas Riverwater.
Doran Cameron, Executive Assistant to the Board.
Lee Moore, Clackamas Riverwater.
Dean Phillips, Council.
Bob George, District Engineer.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to open the meeting with the roll of Carol. So you're going to do your presentation before we open up the budget hearing, is that right?
That's correct. We've got a presentation. The first thing before the board this evening is resolution number 16-2012. This is a request to the board to do a general fund appropriation transfer for the current fiscal year that we're in. So the purpose of this resolution is to transfer $100,000 from the general fund materials and services to the personnel services. Oh, yes, thank you, Bob. You have two PowerPoint packages in front of you. The first one is for this resolution, the second one is for the budget hearing.
And you're going to go through them?
We're going to the first one now. This is an action item for the board, and then once the budget hearing is opened by the board, after this action item is taken care of, then we'll begin the second one.
Great, thank you.
So the reason we're asking for this transfer is to avoid overspending in the personnel services category for fiscal year 2012. And the reason we're finding ourselves in this position is that we have fewer internal labor hours being allocated to the CIP projects this year. So consequently, those hours are paid from the general fund. When you go to Oregon local budget law, they have a great presentation that includes some of the new things with this budget, which is also general budget law information. And I've provided an excerpt from their presentation, but I've also provided a link so that if anybody would like to go through the entire presentation, you certainly can do that. So this is referring to what you do if you need to make changes to a budget after it's adopted. And the budget is a plan based on estimates, and the appropriations are what authorize the expenditures in the particular categories. And budgets can be changed during the year when the need arises. Some changes do require a supplemental budget. Those changes that require a supplemental budget would be if we were going to increase the overall appropriations for the year. What we're asking for is simply a transfer from the materials and services to the personnel services. So this can just be made by a resolution of the board, and it's just moving appropriations between existing categories within a fund. An appropriation is a limitation. It tells us we can spend X number of dollars in a particular category. And by law, we are not to exceed that appropriation. So that's why we're here before you tonight. We wanted to provide a little bit more background on how we allocate costs between CIP and the general fund. So I'm going to turn this over to Bob George, and he's going to walk you through the process.
So in the capital improvement program, basically, we're going to do go through a labor development and how personal services are allocated within the CIP program. The presentation tonight, we're going to do transfer of funds and how it relates to CIP, labor, and general funds, personal services. Going to do a quick look at the CIP projects we had for 2011-2012. I'm going to give an example of how I developed the project, cost estimate, budget summary. And then we'll slide into the budget workbook that we utilize between the whole department, the whole CIP uses it. But I bring our engineering estimates from engineering ease down to financial ease. We have some different terminologies, and I'll show you how I bring our costs, our labor costs, into the budget workbook.
I'm going to hold off on questions until the presentation is finalized.
So what I did was I grabbed, highlighted the one in green, the Glen Oak transmission main replacement project, as an example of how I developed the cost for the project. We have in the past, and have gone through on this, the one on the wall on our right side, the machines over here, the priority selection criteria. We went through that a month ago on how we develop CIP projects. This is part of that process. This is some of the paperwork I have in my files as I work through those programs. So we have narratives, we have schedules, what customers affect, pressure zones, a fair amount of information that we keep this available as we start developing the project. With the project defined, we go through and itemize our preliminary design, come up with estimated quantities, estimated unit prices. So we come up with a budget number that we can, these are all estimates. These numbers have been reflected and are reflected in the budget for the 10-11 year, 11-12, I guess 11-12. This part is the construction part. The next page I have here is where I break it down using the, I'm going to back up one. Here's the construction schedule, $723,000 for that portion of the project. As you can see up here, I bring it over to the next page, and then I break it down into understandable, at least for myself, construction subtotals, engineering, surveying, legal services, other services like Oregon City construction permits, special inspections. We come up with estimates for those. We have an overhead cost. Then, on the inside, services which are in-house engineering, which we use a 15% estimate of construction costs. We have other services, which include things, in-house inventories, labor, equipment, other than engineering. And then we have an overhead cost of 30.7% that we use against the cost of the project. And we're covering all our other overhead general costs, equipment, rental, trucks, equipment we use, insurance, it's just all our overhead costs. We use 30.7, that's the number we've been using. This project happened to span 2 years. It spanned 10-11, and it spanned 11-12 years, for a total cost of close to a little slightly over $1 million on the estimate. What I do then, and this is where I get in preparation of bringing it to the workbook in facts, is I bring it over and I break it into the 2 years, same cost. And what I've done here, I've highlighted the items that I will be, they all transfer, but I do combine several of them so they will more equate to the facts workbook. I'll show you here as an example. Note the purpley blue color, the $60,000 one. I'm going to go to a tab workbook sheet that I work with Karen and Ms. Wright there's the internal labor. I'm gonna go back again. This one is internal labor for engineering plus other services, which is internal. We take it over into the budget workbook, it goes in the internal. Now here again, I'm only showing one project. All the projects are treated the same. I have the same type of worksheets for each project. Then go back, here is our overhead costs. That is a combination of the outside interest and in-house interest for a total of $35,777. Again, brought it over into the proper column. This is where I handed off the facts out there. I've done my engineering work, bring our costs as labor as it relates to engineering projects and the CIP program. What we do next with it, Karen does, well, really, the man Karen does it, but all the engineers, all the managers get together, and we go through, and the expense column here, 499 expense column, is for the CIP labor column. We go through the project as I work on it, we determine the percentage. And now, what I'm doing here on this one, this is all the project inclusive. I've switched gears a little here. Before it was one project, showed you how I got to that number. We now add all the numbers together in that budget workbook. This total, the 329, is brought forward. It will be brought forward by these percentages based on the type of person working it. We have waterworks mechanics, we have new service coordinators, we have senior maintenance tech. They all, the green lines represent percentages I have in the expense column for CIP. This then is walked over to the next budget workbook, which is actual dollars based on salaries and overhead costs. As you note, it comes to dollars now. The same amount of dollars based on percentages, that's $328,000. This is personal services only. This is the same number that we had come up with in the previous worksheets. So we're walking this through our worksheets to the final budget. And there's the number. With these numbers, these get transferred and are in the budget documents themselves. This 329 is reflected in the CIP on page 2 under personal services for $329,525. So these numbers, this personal service CIP number, goes directly into the budget. Those are the numbers that you see as board members in the budget committee. Where we're at now, well, I've had the facts staff do is summarize water resource operations and engineering that are involved in our CIP labor portion of it. And you'll see that for the water resource budget, I have $15,000 budgeted. Right now, they're only spent $189. The operations, they have a $97,000 budget for CIP program. They, at this time, have only spent $54,000. Engineering, next line, we have budgeted $216,000. We spent $131,000 as of April 30th of this year. We have 2 more months of labor to be included. Now, at this time for the totals, here's again, there's the budget, $329,000. We spent $185,000 of our internal CIP budget for labor. What we have not spent is $144,000 at this time. Do note, we do anticipate about $50,000 to $70,000 of additional CIP labor in the next 2 months, and that will bring this dollar amount. Oh my goodness! Isn't that just the way it works? That will bring it down below the 100,000 mark, closer to probably 80,000. I anticipate, based on the estimates that have been forecasted on labor and anticipated work going forward. It comes down to, because we did not do the work in the CIP, staff is still working. So and they're working on non-CIP projects, and we have quite a few of those too. So to pay for those, that salary comes out of the general fund. So what I'm saying is the appropriate amount for labor in the general fund is short approximately $100,000 to cover salary. Since we cannot move money from the CIP fund to the general fund needs to be adjusted up to cover that salary. The total personnel services does not change. The money to pay for salary just comes from a different fund. So there are no increases in personal services. So right now, basically, you have questions.
Commissioner Howard.
Yeah, I do hope, Bob, that you didn't do all this work because my question of last week was misunderstood. If so, my apologies, because this had nothing to do with my question at all. So let me see if I can restate my question and get it answered. Great job, great explanation, but that really didn't go to my question. In the budget, which Commissioner Keto may have there, I don't have it in front of me.
Did it bring the budget or the budget hearing?
I have tonight, the new budget, I don't.
It has the adopted one in there too. Currently.
This
Okay,
is
thank you.
the,
Okay,
112.
okay, so here is my question. In the, at least this is what I understood Ms. Sype to say in the last meeting, and if I misunderstood her, then you can correct me. Requirements for 11-12, this is the explanation I thought I heard last week, is that the Revenue Department, after we raised some questions, informed us that our
The State Department of Revenue.
State Department of Revenue, under local budget law, whatever it is, personal, whatever the tax division is, if you want the whole name. In any case, what we were told is that the only thing that could be put in the budget for CIP was capital outlay. So that's my first question. Is that in fact correct?
From the information that we got from Sandy King from the Department of Revenue last year, after she reviewed our budget, that is correct. We cannot itemize personnel services and materials and services in the CIP budget. You can see that initially in the 2011-12, we started with our proposed budget with the dollars broken out that way. The budget was approved that way, and we made that correction based on Ms. King's requirements. I mean, that was, of all the things that she looked at in the budget, that was the only thing that she said we absolutely must do. So based on those requirements, we moved the dollars for the appropriation in the CIP fund to capital outlay only.
Okay, so, and that was done before the board adopted the budget?
That is correct.
Okay.
Because the board adopted it the correct way, which is just
Okay,
capital outlay.
Commissioner, I'd rather get my answers from Ms. White if you don't mind. So, so it looks like what happened is, since we can't charge anything under CIP except capital outlay.
All of the cost, including the internal labor, which we actually account for as a personal services account number, is considered capital outlay. It is part of the capitalized asset that we are creating through the CIP programs.
Well, here's, I guess I'm not getting through. So, if we had kind of not been working at the last minute to correct the budget, would we have moved that $329,525 to the general fund personal services portion of the budget?
Absolutely not. That dollar amount is part of the capitalized cost of the capital improvement project that we're doing. when Bob spends time working on a capital project, we have maybe, $100,000 worth of materials. We might have a consultant or an engineering firm that bills us $100,000, and whatever time Bob spends becomes part of the cost of that asset.
Okay, so what happened then is engineering didn't spend as much time in CIP, so that time did not get capitalized.
That's correct.
And, so that, and where those, so CIP personnel cost will never show up as personnel cost. It will only show up as a capitalized expense.
In the audit and in the budget, that is correct. We can provide detail of how much internal labor we have included in our CIP.
No, I'm not concerned about what engineering did. I'm not concerned about where their time went. All I was trying to do was figure out what happened. And so, some of the time now, obviously, was not spent in CIP. So in our CIP budget, we shouldn't have hit anywhere near this number. I don't think we did anyway. But because it's in a different fund, basically the time that we did not account for in personal services in the general fund has to be paid for, and we are at the top of our personal services expenditures, and we are going to go over by, we're presuming $100,000 if we don't make this transfer. And there is money in materials and services to make the transfer.
Correct.
Okay,
And
that's
I would
all I
like-
needed, that's all I needed to know.
I would like to say I rounded up. The 100,000 is a little bit more than I believe we'll need. But the interesting thing about budget appropriations, if you exceed it by $1, it would be written up as a note in the audit.
Yes, and that has happened to us.
So I do not want that to happen. So I did round up, but we do have sufficient room in the materials and services budget this year.
Yeah, no, I wasn't asking for, 20 minutes. I just wanted an understanding of that accounting process, that's all.
Well, I think it was necessary because you've made accusations against the general manager, which I
Commissioner
have.
Kehoe, you need
Which
to
I
stop
have in
that.
writing, which I have in
You need
writing
to stop
here,
personal
which is, no,
attacks
No.
right now.
Commissioner Holloway, I think an
Stop,
explanation is in order.
Please, Commissioner Kehoe.
Because there have been accusations that we were not abiding by Oregon State budget law because of the transfers in CIP from from materials and services to personal services. And what Ms. Bright has explained is that per the department, or the State Department of Revenue, it is not required to separate those two categories, that it's all under capital outlay. And there's been accusations that, I'll call him in a minute, Mike, that we were not in compliance, which in fact we were, and we are allowed by budget law to transfer funds within a funding category.
That was never challenged, Commissioner. You
No,
are
actually
all
it
wet,
was.
and you are
But now
insulting,
that you have-
and you are inappropriate,
Now
and
that
you
you
are
have the answer-
helping us not have a productive meeting.
Now that we have the answer,
So,
I
stop.
am certain you will not make that allegation again.
I didn't make that allegation, Commissioner. You're just wasting everybody's time
Commissioner
with
Cardwell?
spurious accusations,
Commissioner Cardwell?
and you're embarrassing us.
Done, Pat?
Hmm?
Are you done?
Do you want me to make copies of your email?
Tammy,
Because I can,
Tammy.
and I can pass it around.
you gave it to me, so let me have it. I move the board approve resolution number 16-2012 authorizing appropriation transfer within the general fund for fiscal year 2011-2012, effective date June 21st, 2012.
Second it.
Is there any further discussion? Doris, can you call the vote, please?
Commissioner Cardwell?
Yes.
Commissioner Holloway?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemper?
Yes.
Commissioner Sterling?
No.
And Commissioner Kehoe?
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0. One. 401.
Right.
So now at this time, I'm going to call the budget hearing. And I'm going to have staff, Carol, I believe it's you, I don't know if you have anyone else.
No, just me.
Okay. So the budget officer is going to provide a presentation, and then at that point, we'll have, if we have any questions from the board, and then we'll take public comment. And then if there's a motion, we'll take the motion, and then if there's further public comment, we can take that before the vote.
Okay, the budget hearing would need to be closed prior to the motion.
Okay.
The motion will happen in the remainder of the discussion meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. First, I'd like to start off with just a summary of the total budget. This is the information that was provided in the budget message. It's on page M4, I believe. And this was the budget that was presented to the budget committee. We held 4 budget committee meetings, and the budget committee approved the budget as presented based upon line item detail that was provided for discussion. The budget committee also asked for inclusion of a cost of service rate study in the general fund professional and contracted services appropriation. We've estimated that cost to be $100,000. That dollar amount was not included in the expenditures for the budget that was proposed, and it was not specifically added by the motion at the budget committee meeting. So staff recommendation, my recommendation would be that we add that to the materials and services expenditure line item and reduce the ending fund balance of the general fund by that same amount, so we maintain a balanced budget. So people might have concerns, how does that impact our ability to meet our debt covenants? So I have provided a debt covenant calculation based on the proposed budget. In this case, I added an additional $100,000 to the administrative services departmental line. And even with the $100,000 addition, we still meet our debt covenants for the next fiscal year. You can see that I am also showing, we've talked about the $1 million transfer from the rate stabilization fund to the general fund. And I do have that shown in that middle column. That's the estimated 2012. And this is based on where we think we will end the year. That $1 million gives us sufficient coverage, and in fact, we're tighter on the stabilized net revenues that include the SDCs, because our SDCs have not been very high this year. So by my calculation, we could get by with $985,000. So we would only transfer the dollar amount that we need, leaving the balance in the rate stabilization fund. We can always spend less. So I'd also like to remind the board about the $800,000 in reductions that staff handled prior to presenting a proposed budget. So these are the areas, the categories of those reductions. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the appropriation level. And the motion that was approved in the budget committee included those green sheets. So we've handed out the green sheets again, just so everybody has them if you don't have the ones from the budget book. And what I would like to talk about are some of the challenges that the district would face if we allocated the budget by line item. So on those green sheets, we do have some actual, like year-to-date actuals for the numbers compared with this year's budget. And I've got a few examples of some areas where we would have had problems. The first one I'd like to address is workers' compensation. This is the workers' compensation insurance that we're required to carry on all of the employees. And in fiscal 11-12, we had a budget of over $58,000, but the actual bill came in at $62,000. The budget was completed in May and adopted in June. The invoice came in the first or second week of July. We get discounts if we pay it promptly. And if we had had a line item budget and workers' compensation was itemized at $58,567, we would have had to wait, not pay the bill, until coming to the board asking for authorization to do a transfer. This workers' compensation, we don't know what the dollar amount is until we see the bill. And it's based every year on our experience from the prior year. And what we do is estimate it based on what we saw happen, you know, what the bill was in the prior year, the number of employees, which has stayed pretty stable for the district. And they do kind of true it up at the end of the year. But when we get the bill, we have to pay it, and if we were appropriated by line item, we would not be able to do that without board action.
And Ms. Bright, when in the progress of a year does that workers' compensation bill come due? I think we pay it monthly, do we
No,
not?
we get an annual bill, we receive a bill in July, and we pay it. So right after adopting a budget, we would have to come to the board and ask for a change in the, potentially, we would have to come to the board and ask for a change in the appropriation.
But Ms. Bright, excuse me, Commissioner Holloway, the insurance carrier has no problem in sending you monthly or quarterly statements based upon the amount of income that has been paid to its employees. They're not the ones that are telling you we're sending you only one bill annually.
Yes, and that's how the workers' compensation has been set up with the district. It's based on the type of work that individuals do and the budgeted salaries.
And experience modification. And so, and that is established, certainly not at the end, that is
It's established throughout, but they're not going to change the dollar amount every month. There's a standard rate per type of work.
Yeah,
You know,
I
so my
understand
rate's
what
cheap
you're
because I
saying.
sit at a desk, you know, the guys
So-
out in the field pay more.
So, but there is no reason why we could not be following it along and
It's the
getting.
first thing, it's the first bill we get.
No, what I'm saying is, even at this point in time, I think that we certainly could contact SDAO and find out where we are within a few days of the end of the month. And,
Well, let me move on.
and
This
I'd
is
be
not-
perfectly happy to,
This
to
is not
deal
my
with it
only
if you want to come
example.
back to us.
This is not my only example.
Presentation go on,
Yeah.
and then if we have further
Let's move on
questions.
to unemployment insurance. The district is self-insured. So if we have somebody that no longer works here, that is eligible to receive unemployment, they file their claim through the state. It's not what you would think that somebody gets, 6 months worth of unemployment and we get claims every month. If they get temporary work in the middle or whatever, they no longer claim. Typically, if they don't work long enough at that employer to be covered by that employer, the claim still comes back to us. So again, we budgeted $5,000 for our unemployment insurance, and to date, we have spent over $6,000. We have to pay the claims as they come in, and again, we don't know when that'll be. Now, we have a stable workforce. It's not like we have a whole lot of claims out there, but when the claims come in, we must pay them. My third example is assessments and taxes. So when we put the budget together for fiscal 11-12, we took the dollar amount that we paid the prior year, we increased it by 3% because that's the state law for property taxes. They can increase your assessed value by 3% a year. So we budgeted $6,500. The bill came in at $7,600 because there was a change in the not public use, the private use of this building. The square footage changed when the remodel was done, and they did a calculation and came up with a new dollar amount. So, this year we're gonna budget for 3% greater than 7,604, but at the time, we would have had to come to the board to get approval had we been appropriated at the line item level. And again, the property tax bills come early November. To get the discount, they have to be paid by November 15th. That may not have coincided appropriately with a board meeting. So each of these items would have required board approval of a transfer before the dollars could be spent.
We're gonna have her go through the presentation and then please look at questions.
Pardon me, Commissioner?
Please hold your questions until the end of the presentation.
Anything more complicated?
Actually, we're kind of getting ready to move on to another topic, so if we do have
We have
questions
questions in
about
regards
line
to
item
this.
appropriation, I would be happy to answer them now.
Yeah.
Other questions in regards to this topic?
Yes, Commissioner Ms. Bright, I do understand workers' comp very well. Unemployment insurance, I know it's self-funded, and it is my belief that historically, CRW has in fact not challenged unemployment claims that could have been challenged. So I am much happier having a tight timeline. Also, it's certainly going to be no secret when a staff member departs, which is the event that would engender an unemployment claim. And I would think that the general manager certainly would be able to come back to us. Further, I would suggest that if things get really dicey at the beginning of the year and a whole bunch of people depart our employment, which seems highly unlikely because our workforce is very stable, I think that you guys certainly should be able to forecast that you're going to need more money and would be able to come to us and have it moved. And again, in the case of the assessments and taxes, should it turn out to be a problem, they have to be paid by November 15th. We have a board meeting before that. Our board meetings are always the second Thursday, but usually the second Thursday. So I simply do not see these as issues that can't be handled with a little diligence.
You're very familiar with Excel spreadsheets. Have you ever gotten that circular reference? You know what I'm talking about when you're trying to do like a
I know a
calculation, you
circular
get
reference.
a circular reference. As I was looking through and thinking about these things and the challenges that we would have with a line item appropriation, one of the things that I thought about is as we go forward, at the beginning of the year, we really shouldn't have any problems. I mean, there's a few things like the workers' comp, that's one of the first bills we get. But as we go through the year and things happen that we aren't aware of or that we don't have any control over, and we run into more and more items, towards the end of the year, we might need to call special meetings. But if we start to exceed the appropriation for public notices, then we don't have a mechanism for calling a special meeting to get a transfer of dollars. That, to me, is a circular reference.
Frankly.
So I have a question for you.
Yes.
So many of these are contracts, is that correct? Most of them are recurring contracts?
On your green list, you have a list
Well,
of.
the ones, the examples that you provided to the board. They're either
They're not really
recurring payments or they're contracts.
They're annualized, and they are externally mandated, annualized payments.
Exactly, so they're recurring payments.
No.
Well, taxes are recurring
Yeah,
payments, and
annually.
so is
They're
workers'
annual.
compensation.
But
So
they're not contracts in the sense of.
well, workers' compensation, we have a contract with
It's
our
an insurance
insurance
policy, and Mr. Phillips has
And
pointed
we
out that they
have-
are not contracts.
Well, they actually, we do have a contract with our insurance broker, is that correct?
We do have a contract with our insurance broker, but
And he provides
That's nothing to do
the
with our
best fit
insurance
for our
policy.
insurance policy, and we adopt that.
Yeah.
So my question is, July of 2011, we were provided with a recurring invoices contract. It was a possible motion for the board to adopt for
Mhm.
recurring payments,
Correct.
which the board adopted. Now, that was in July after the budget was approved.
That's right.
Now, some of these items that are on your examples of appropriation level are in this document. So I don't understand why it would be difficult to keep these green sheets, and if we have these recurring payments, to do both actions
Okay.
in the same meeting.
The recurring payments are also estimates in many cases. In, I would say most cases, we do have contracts, but we come up with an estimate of how much it's going to be. It is fully our intent to include those green sheets in the budget document. I am just strongly recommending that the appropriation be at the category level of personnel services, new name since the new law, materials and services, capital outlay, transfers, and contingency, which is the standard. It is the recommended procedure by the Department of Revenue for all budgets that are compliant with the Oregon local budget law. It is the standard practice of essentially all the other districts that I'm aware of. And it is an appropriate way to put some structure around the dollars that will be spent.
Okay, so, but these monetary amounts that are going over the appropriation level are not huge amounts.
No,
They're,
but $1 over an appropriation level.
I understand that, but what I'm wondering is if we're able to adopt something like these green sheets and add a clause like Oregon state budget law allows, where you don't go over 10% or $5,000.
No,
I believe,
that's not
whichever.
what the law says with the.
I understand it
with the
doesn't,
10%.
it doesn't count for the appropriation level. I understand that it doesn't apply to this. It would be a board policy issue. But my question is, if the board could adopt a clause like that along with these green sheets that's similar to what state budget law allows for the fund level, at the funding level. Therefore, the general manager would not be found at fault for going over the appropriation level. It would be brought back to the board. The board would be aware of it, but it's within a certain monetary amount.
If the way the Oregon local budget law works is any amount in excess of the appropriation. So if the appropriation is at personnel services and we spend $1 more than what we budgeted, then we would be exceeding that, and
That level.
and it would be in the financial.
But we're allowed to
statement.
do that if it's within that
No,
percentage?
No, you cannot
Okay.
exceed at all. $1
Okay.
in excess is exceeding the appropriation.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holloway.
Oh, yeah, as I understand it, the state law allows us to transfer money within the general fund, for example. That's probably not the only one where it works. We can transfer money within the general fund, but that, and up to a certain amount before we would need to call the budget committee back into session and have a change to the budget. But appropriations are kind of a separate category. And, but I have a question. All of these things on the green sheet, those are all accounts, correct?
Yes.
And as Mr. George's lovely display up here showed, there are account numbers on all of those things. So, and you track that in the accounting system. You don't track that on Excel spreadsheets with circle references, I would assume, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I was not saying
Okay.
that was a circular reference. I
Yeah,
was
I
just
know,
saying it
I
reminded me of an
Yeah,
Excel circular reference.
I understand the idea. So, but the point is, it's all there, it's in the accounting system, it's broken down at the account level. It's easy to report out on it.
Okay.
The our sister districts around, in fact,
Okay.
do report out on that basis every month.
We're going to get to that in just a minute. I've got a few more things to cover, and then we'll go back to the appropriation discussion, if that's okay.
I have one more
with you.
question from Commissioner Cardwell.
I'll look at it.
So let me follow up on your question, Mr. Kehoe. Just looking at the numbers up there, for example, taxes and assessments. If you were to have the 10% reference there, we would still be equal. So if you go 10% of $6,500, would still put you at $7,100. If you went 10% of the unemployment insurance, that would put you at $5,500, and we would still have to come back to the board.
But Mrs. Bright, or Ms. Bright answered my question, which is we'd have to reconvene a budget committee.
Right. I was
budget
just saying
hearing.
No.
I do want to say.
Within general fund, we can move stuff, the board alone without anything else.
I'm just not sure what problem we're trying to fix.
Well, that's,
Yeah,
okay,
okay.
now I'm hearing two different things.
Let's get straight on this.
Okay, let me explain changes to the budget. If we need to make a change to the budget that exceeds 10% of the budget, it's 10% or $5,000, but we don't have any budgets that the $5,000 is the number. So if we do anything that exceeds the 10%, we do not have to call back the budget committee. The budget committee is basically finished. They can be called back if the board so desires, but they're not required. If you exceed the 10%, you do have to have a budget hearing, and you have to do all the notice requirements for a budget hearing. If it is a change in the budget that is less than 10%, you can do it at a regular board meeting without a separate budget hearing.
And
So, but what about at the appropriation level, what happens?
At the appropriation level, as we did this evening with the general fund already, with moving that $100,000. This is just a board action to transfer funds within the general fund. We did not increase the budget. If we were appropriated at a lower level, for example, line item, then we would be doing those probably every month and perhaps needing to call special meetings to handle that kind of activity. So that we
Okay.
could spend the money that
So-
we needed to run the district.
What are the possibilities of adopting these green sheets as a guideline as opposed to as part of the budget? Is that, are we going to
Well,
be?
I'm gonna get
You'll
to
get
that
to that?
in
We have a
just a second.
proposal to.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a
I'm trying to make
proposal
everyone happy.
that I think you'll all like, but we're not there yet. So again, you know, as Mr. Morton said, it's what problem are we trying to solve here? There's been a lot of discussion about spending too much in certain categories, and we kind of wanted to just kind
Well,
of
you know,
run through a
it's like
highlight.
At one point, I want to make sure the public has the information and the board has the information. On the second hand, I don't want to make it impossible for the district to run its business, so.
During the budget committee, we also, besides the green sheets, we had actually a couple of other green sheets that broke down some of those larger categories into what do we use those categories for? For example, buildings and grounds maintenance is not how much we pay the landscapers. There's a whole bunch of things, and I believe Karen provided you with other sheets of those that show those categories. Are they white?
Yes,
Oh,
they're
blue sheets, okay. So in contract work expenditures, now in this case, we pulled out IT and we're not including any CIP work here. This year so far, we've spent almost 306,000. Examples of what goes into that category or, you know, that line item of contract work are the meter readers. Paving that we have to do once we, you know, dug a hole and, you know, replaced the pipe. Flagging, the rate study went into that category. Electrical work that we have done, and utility locates that we have to do. Those types of items go into this line item. After this, I've provided a list of basically the service provided and the vendor name that provides that service. So that's not on the blue sheet, that's just in the presentation, but we've got kind of a list, and these are, you'll see those vendor names on a fairly regular basis on the accounts payable check registers that you get every month. And then next to that name is kind of a list of what do we use these people for? Why do we have these? And these are all items that would go under that contract services category. There have also been questions about the operational policies. So Jody Cochran's name is on that list. She has been working on operational policies for the district a little over about a year and a half. She did some other work for us prior to that. I think most of the board, Commissioner Sterling wasn't here, but she did a presentation and a work session for the board when we were talking about some of the financial metrics, comparing ourselves with some of the other water districts around. So in the board policies, section 1.9, it does say that the board delegates to the general manager the responsibility to develop these policies.
only personnel policies, Ms.
No,
Flynn.
no, no.
This is directly from the operational policies. The general manager the responsibility to develop the administrative regulations governing CRW with said regulations being provided to each board member. So Jody has been working on the policies. We don't have them quite done yet. They will be made available to everyone on the board. This fiscal year, we have spent $49,600 on that process. Again, a moment ago I showed you where we have made the cuts, the $800,000 worth of cuts. We did not include any continuation of this project in the current year budget. That's being postponed until there's sufficient funding to do the balance of the project.
Or do you have a question about that specific statement?
On operational policies?
No, on Ms. Cochran's cost.
Okay.
According to the accounts payable, which I have been told are not an accurate record of what we're paying in the sense that we have no idea what time period any of those amounts covers or what invoices. However, we have written checks to her this year identified for that purpose for, I forget the exact number, but it is over $50,000. And this is why I personally am so hot on trying to get some financial controls here. And we have spent something like $105,000 or $6,000.
$106,800, year-to-date $56,000.
Since,
Okay.
since which time?
This is within this fiscal year.
For Jody Cochran.
Yes, for this purpose.
Um,
And
First
that's.
of all, I understand your question, and I actually take offense to your representation that I told you that accounts payable records were not accurate.
Actually, it was Mr. Moore
What
who
I
said it.
said,
I didn't say that either.
what I said.
You said we
is
can't tell
that-
what you're
Okay,
paying
let
for.
her answer the question, please, because you presented an allegation and assertion. So please let the CFO answer the question.
What I said is that it is not appropriate to attempt to do financial analysis based on accounts payable because of the year-end accruals. So we did pay a payment to Ms. Cochran in July that covered work that she did for us last June. So that would have been a prior fiscal year. The way governmental accounting works is we have up to 3 months. So July, August, and September, any payments that are for work that occurred in June can and should be accrued back. And that's one of the things that the auditors look at. They look at all of our check registers that we did in July and August, and they look back at the invoices and say, did you put that expense in this year or last year, and did you do that appropriately? We have and do account for everything appropriately, and when you look at the $56,000 paid to Ms. Cochran, she got the check, and she might be on a cash basis, and she's actually probably on a calendar basis. We're on a fiscal year basis, and her first payment of the year was for prior fiscal year work.
Well, my concern, as I have conveyed innumerable times, is that this board does not receive enough financial information
And I
to
am
have,
getting to that.
and if I may finish, to have a clue as to where we are. And so the best I have been able to do is put those checks in an Excel spreadsheet, which does not have any circular references, and sort them by fiscal year. So I hope you can understand my frustration with not having any method to know what the heck is going on
But I
or
don't-
where.
But I don't think that's a CFO or general manager issue. I think that's a board issue, which we've addressed as a board, and that there's some changes that we'd like to see coming up in the future. But I think that Ms. Bright is probably correct if you're doing things by fiscal year and adding the July payments, which I'm real sorry for Ms. Cochran, her tax return's probably gonna be fairly steep.
That's what I'd say.
Or steeper than doing it by fiscal year, that I believe, unless I'm wrong, that the information you provided, because I've heard allegations by Commissioner Holloway and Commissioner Sterling, especially with this Cochran contract, that the general manager has overspent his contracting authority, which by board resolution is within $50,000, and the payment that I was shown was below $50,000. and that the payments for fiscal year 2012 says it's 49,600, not 102 or whatever number you presented.
That's over 2 years, Commissioner.
No, you said it was from this year.
No.
I asked the question. I asked the question.
What did you tell her, Commissioner Sterling?
I asked the
Said
question.
year-to-date, $56,000.
That's not what you said. You didn't say year-to-date.
Well, play the recording back.
106.
You got the video and the recorder on?
So, and I asked at what time period you were counting that amount from.
And I explained to you fiscal.
Well, you didn't give me, you said this fiscal year.
Something like 105,000 over 2 years. Okay.
Okay,
But
so
the
over-
point, and I absolutely agree. I hold the board majority responsible for the board not having sufficient information to know what's going on. I absolutely agree with that.
I'd like to kind of get back to
Thank you.
some budget issues. So another area of concern has been IT expenses. If you look at IT expenses, these are actually in various different categories within the budget. So we do charge a lot of activity that benefits everybody we charge to the IT department, but when we buy specific equipment or peripherals for a specific department, that gets charged to the department. So all of the IT expenditures, we added a line down there at the bottom, that's computers, peripherals, and software for all other departments. This year to date, in materials and services, it's been $121,000. If you add up the computer peripherals and software that was in IT as well as in the other departments, that's approximately $33,000. And that includes things like the servers that we've been working on, replacing the servers. And then it could also include printers or monitors or other items that we need. So a third area that has been questioned has been legal expenses. And here is a listing of legal expenses through June 20th of this fiscal year. The legal budget for 2012 was $426,000. Year to date, we've spent $205,000, and that's in all funds. One of the things that we included as we built that budget, and again, you can look at those blue sheets and see what's included in the legal budget going forward. But as we built the budget last year, we did include a significant dollar amount for boundary protection, and we have not had to spend any of that money this year in the legal. So that's why we're, about half of what we budgeted. And so that's one of the areas where we've been able to save some money.
I have a question in regards to that, when you say boundary protection, because I know that the 190 agreement, which is on the agenda, that we did use legal services.
Yes,
So-
and we've got about $16,000 that was identified specifically to the 190. There may have been some other things that we didn't, that may not have been identified, so it was probably under the CRW legal. But
Okay, thank you.
But we have spent some money, but not nearly the amount that we included in the budget.
I think it's also important to note, because you go back one step,
Yes.
there's been a lot of comments about Phillips Law Office, essentially that all these charges are going to Mr. Phillips. What you see is a lot of these are charges for other events that the board has requested legal advice on or legal services on that we run through Phillips Law Office. It's not money that's going to him. It's money that's going to other vendors. So when you look up at, for example, I think there's an employment, there's South Fork Water Board
BCT.
litigation, there's BCT up there. Those are all charges that run through Mr. Phillips's account, but they're really done on behalf of the board.
I would suggest that, at least in my sitting on the board, I certainly was not involved in ordering all of those legal services, so I think a fair number of them come at the behest of the general manager. And I would also say,
Could you go back a
again,
second?
to the board, that had we been allowed to have that information, you know, all, we would perhaps not feel, I would perhaps not feel so strongly that Mr. Phillips is raking in $250,000 a year, but I have no way of knowing that he is not, because the only records we have are the check records, and they are all payable to Phillips Law. So, of course, there are questions.
So I guess, Commissioner Holloway, could you explain which ones up there that I authorized?
I have no idea, Mr. Moore, because I can't get any information about
You certainly
them.
feel free
Well,
to
you
make the
just-
allegations.
You just stated that he was directing those legal expenses, so which ones are you referring to?
So far as I am aware, I don't recall anything that the board specifically authorized relative to employment, for example. So, you know.
We wouldn't.
I don't recall the board authorizing Norm Day to do forensic work. You know, and without, again, all I'm trying to convey to the board, since it's the board's responsibility, is that when there is no information available, when commissioners are prohibited from getting information that relates to district expenditures, and all we see is one name and a very large number, there are certainly questions.
Well, and
It's that uncomplicated.
I'd like to remind the board and Commissioner Holloway that she was invited to come in to view these legal bills, and she refused.
And I was told by you that they would be redacted before I could see them.
No,
So,
that is not
Mr.
true,
Moore,
because-
I have
Will you
it
let me finish, Ms. Holloway,
on the
first?
meeting recordings. You can't deny it.
Because Commissioner Kemper was involved when we invited you in. You wanted to meet in this room. You wanted your husband to be outside the door. And we said, the room upstairs is available to you if you wanted to come in to view those bills. So let's get the story straight here.
Okay.
Mr. Moore, the record is the record.
Okay.
I am not
So-
lying, and I don't want
I
to
think
be
maybe-
called a liar
Oh, I'm sorry.
when you
Commissioner-
have specifically stated,
I have the memos.
Okay, Commissioner, I have a.
you can
Commissioner-
write anything you like,
All
Mr.
right,
Moore. The
Commissioner-
meeting record
They
is
were
a
addressed-
record.
They were
Commissioner-
addressed to you,
I'm gonna
Commissioner
allow
Holloway.
Commissioner Kemper to.
You can
to
write
talk,
anything,
and
doesn't
then I'm
make it
going
true.
to continue on with Carol's presentation, because I think you have more about legal expenses, correct? Commissioner Kemper?
Okay, I was going to make a comment to Commissioner Holloway. It seems to me that any commissioner who was paying attention during our meetings would have realized that there were other attorneys being worked with through
Commissioner,
Dean Phillips.
It is-
And that obviously they were being paid, and there were fairly substantial amounts included in this, for that, which
Commissioner-
I was well aware of, he was not getting.
okay, Commissioner, I understand that even when Ms. Harbarger came in, she saw redacted invoices. I have been
That's what I
told,
read.
that if I am, first of all, I cannot have copies of them. Second, if I'm going to see them, they're going to be redacted. Now, let's get this straight. Right now, on the record, we are on audio and video. Mr. Moore, Mr. Phillips, board, are you agreed that I can come in and see all legal services invoices unredacted?
Well, I-
Yes or no?
I'm not
I
sure about that.
believe.
Yes
that-
or no?
I believe that you violated executive session
Yes
privilege.
or no?
And because of that action, the board took the action to exclude you from executive session materials.
Has nothing to do with legal invoices. Yes or no? It's a direct question.
Can you proceed with?
Answer, no, okay, obviously the answer is no.
Can you proceed?
It's been established. Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know, I would like to know whether Commissioner Holloway's accusations or assertions that the Oregonian was not allowed to see anything other than
That's what I
essentially almost
understand.
all redacted invoices.
That's what I understand.
That's what you have said, is that she saw virtually nothing that was not redacted.
I
That's
didn't
what you
say
said.
that. I said I understand that what she saw had redactions.
you've made statements and emails that
Commissioner,
suffered.
okay, Ms. Barber is
You
here.
guys-
I have asked you all a direct
let's-
question. Stop dancing around it and answer it.
Okay. Can we
Yes
go-
or no?
Can we follow through with the presentation, please?
So another thing we wanted to take a look at was our audit costs, our annual audit costs, as well as our legal expenses. So we're kind of looking over a significant period of time. And as you can see, the audit costs used to be significantly lower. The first year when Van Beek did the audit of fiscal year 2010, we did have the FEMA money that caused us to have the single audit, the A133 audit. So that did increase the cost. But when you see fiscal year 10 audit, which was paid for in fiscal year 2011, that was the excessive dollar amount due to the thorough investigation of
Yeah, the forensic
any
audit.
allegations that had been made. You can also see here the kind of swings in the legal expense. And I do have, in fiscal 2007, the district spent less than $140,000 in legal. And
In
if you recall,
2007?
in 2007, fiscal year 2007, which
But
began
we had the
July of
South
2006 through June of 2007, the dollar amount for legal was $139,917.
Wow.
So are you saying, Ms. Bright, there's a direct correlation between the cost of the audit and CRW's legal costs?
I am saying that the cost of the audit significantly increased because of the thorough investigation done by the auditors to validate or invalidate the allegations that had been made. And of course, in that year, we had to pay Van Beek as well as Moss Adams, even though Van Beek did not complete an audit for us.
Yes, but you haven't answered my question. You have a line for legal
No,
expense
because look at
and a
this-
line for
And
audit
if
costs.
you look at this number over here, this amount was additional legal costs that were associated with the
And
audit.
if you look at the chart,
And
that's
so
not
that
what
number, the
she's.
64 is taken out of the
So
2.2.
all-
If you look at the chart, that's not what she's saying, because take a look at fiscal
just-
year 2009. We had a low audit cost and a very high legal expense.
All I did was ask her the question, Commissioner. Was she saying there's a correlation? The
Okay,
answer is
well-
yes or no.
Okay, quick.
I am not
It's
saying
not-
there's a
it's not,
correlation.
you know.
I am providing historical information
Okay.
about how much is spent in these categories that people seem to have
Why are you
concerns
putting her on the
about.
hot seat?
So
She's
there's no-
providing you with information, and you're like accusing her of,
Commissioner, I asked her a question. Is that not
Okay, you're-
permissible for a member of the governing body?
everyone can read the chart, Pat.
I asked her a question, that's all.
Okay, well, you're being out of line. and you're
Okay.
being-
No, I'm not.
Yes,
You
you are.
are being obnoxious and interfering where you have no business.
Now we're moving back to the appropriation levels. Again, I have stated that staff strongly recommends that the board appropriate at the levels that the board has always appropriated at. And that would be personnel services, materials and services, capital outlay, transfers, and contingency within the general fund. Because there were changes in the budget law, we said, well, we're not gonna make any assumptions that we know exactly how the Department of Revenue would view these activities. So we sent an email to the Department of Revenue. We provided them with the motion that was made at the Budget Committee meeting and asked a couple of questions. First, does the document, which is the green sheets, does the document become part of the budget document? And then the second question is, does the motion that was made have an impact or direct the Board of Commissioners in how they do appropriations when we have the budget, after the budget hearing?
Would you start that off again, please?
Excuse me?
Okay, so you sent them an email.
Asking them two questions.
Right.
We said, does the document, the green sheets, become part of the budget document? And is the board required to appropriate the budget at the green sheet level? Those were our two questions.
I'm gonna explain something to the public, just because I noticed that there's some members of, some ratepayers and members from the budget committee that are in attendance that may not understand what the green sheets are. And the green sheets that Ms. Bright is referring to are the additional pages in the motion that the Budget Committee presented, that were the line item detail that were passed out at the last Budget Committee meeting, that were actually the white pages. So if you're confused about the color, I just want clarification so we're all following along.
Okay, so we got a response from the Department of Revenue. And the first thing she said is she did not believe the motion as it was made would have any effect on the appropriation resolution. So the board can appropriate, can vote for a resolution that appropriates at a higher level. It doesn't invalidate anything that the Budget Committee did. It's the same total budget. And it just provides those appropriations that are pretty much standard. That's, like I said, what cities do, what other districts do, to allow for unknowns that happen in the year. You know, we've talked about our infrastructure is buried, most of it, so we don't know necessarily what we'll see when we have to dig something up. And so as we are making our educated guesses on putting this budget together, based on what we do know, there's an awful lot of stuff that we don't know.
But the budget report also says that we can allocate down to the line item level if we wish.
It does say that. So, my next comment, and this is what I hope will maybe
That was my
satisfy some of the
question.
concerns.
This is my big question.
The appropriation of the budget is not the same as financial reporting. So, when we handle things on a transactional basis, we enter to a specific general ledger account number. And we can have invoices that get charged to more than one account number. You know, it could be an invoice that's related to, you know, more than one department, or they could be doing some contract work as well as providing some materials. So currently, we report to the board on a monthly basis. We provide you with financial statements that is by department and personnel services, material services, capital outlay, so those expenditure categories. What I propose to the board is that we continue to do that on a monthly basis, and quarterly throughout the budget year, we provide a line item detail report that shows total dollars budgeted by line item and expenditures. And then that quarterly report, we can have a discussion of why are you overspent in this category? What have you done to mitigate that? How are we gonna make sure we don't overspend in the total materials and services?
My concern with that approach is that, one, again, the board's in a situation of not having any control over the expenditures. Number two, when something pops up, and I'll use the modernization of the administration building elevator as an example, and not that I have a problem with operating a safe elevator, certainly, but $40,000 or $50,000, do you find it amusing, Ms. Lewis Wolfram?
Would you please not comment to the public?
Well, she's chuckling back here all the time, it's
Okay.
distracting.
Yeah, I mean, it's
me as well.
very hard to hear anything.
Would the public please keep their comments to themselves, and there is an opportunity for public comment? Okay, thank you.
So we had a situation where, from memory, it was $50,000, $60,000, which the board had no idea of, and the only way we found out, and the number accumulated over a couple of months, no way of finding out except through the check register. We had no idea,
Which
and my
situation are you
questions,
speaking of?
what?
She's talking about the elevator.
The elevator.
Excuse me just one moment. I believe the information about that elevator repair was included in a management report that was part of a board packet.
Not in
Do you
advance.
expect the general manager to call all the board members to tell you
Well,
that this is
here's-
happening? I mean, he
well,
provided
here's-
it in a management
here's-
report.
Here's the thing, I know with the elevator, because of the contracting authority of the general manager, if it's above that amount, it's brought back to the board for approval, which the elevator project was.
Well, I guess I would like to say, as I explained to the board in my management report, that the repair of the elevator was an emergency. We had gotten 3 people caught in the elevator, one at 1:30 in the morning, the janitorial crew. Even under our existing contracting practices, emergencies are addressed and reported to the board as soon thereafter as possible. So in any event, the work would have been done in advance with the type of report that you got at the next available meeting for the work. So I don't know if that's a good example. There may be others, but that certainly isn't one of them.
In that particular case, there was no information whatsoever about the elevator repair until I raised the question after seeing the check in the accounts payable run. And that's just all there is
I guess
to
I'm
it.
just in disagreement with that.
Your privilege.
Okay.
So basically, as I said, this is our proposal to provide line item information. And the reason I'm suggesting quarterly rather than monthly is certainly if you got a monthly report in June, it would be almost nothing. And then July would look huge compared to that because of the accruals, all the activity that we receive in July, all the invoices we receive in July that get booked to the general ledger are accrued to the June time period. We talked about this last year when I was presenting the year-end information. So doing it on a monthly basis, because of where the check runs fall, it wouldn't necessarily be smooth. Whereas if we do it quarterly, it will certainly smooth it out and make it a lot more reasonable. You will continue to get your check register on a monthly basis and your financial reports that we currently provide.
However, if we got this basic set of information, the listing of checks and the amounts and the numbers,
We get that every
and,
month.
no, we don't. We do not get it, we do not get all the checks that are run, or that are, we do not get all the things that are paid out. We need to have that for everything paid out. That includes electronic transfers, payroll,
Electronic transfers
etc.
are included.
And if we have the accounting, the line item accounting, then we can track it by account, and we know what checks are being written, and what payments, I should say, are being made. And if we get a bank reconciliation that shows the amount of money that we actually have coming in, we will be able to understand the gap between what we bill and what we actually collect. And you know, again, it is the board's responsibility. The other water districts around don't have any trouble producing that information on a monthly basis. And our biggest, one of our biggest expenses is payroll. And we pay, I would hope, every 2 weeks. So I don't see that there's any, and there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of expense that's being reported to us on a month-by-month basis. I mean, we write checks every month, so I don't get it.
Well, the board is
Revenue
already,
changes, yes.
the
It's a
board has
bill.
already agreed that even the financial statements can be delayed by as much as 60 days.
Well, and that's
Because
the
we
other problem. We are already 2 months out, which I don't think is acceptable.
But I guess it doesn't solve the problem that you're
And-
talking about. You're gonna have a delayed financial
I
statement.
don't understand.
Well, at least
So,
we
I
know
guess-
what has gone on, which is
Okay.
more than we know now.
So please allow some other commissioners to speak, please. Are there any comments by other
Any
commissioners?
comment? Carol, when we get to that point, so, because it looks like they're not clear to me when we actually get to the point of making a motion.
That has to be after the budget.
No, I
hearing, so,
understand that,
Yeah.
but I want to get some clarity on it
Okay.
when we get there. So
Okay.
when we get to that point, the motion, the draft motion as proposed, is that the one that gives you what you're looking for? Because it appears to be the same number that's on the front that is attached to the motion that was made by the budget committee.
It's the same resolution. We are actually in favor of the goldenrod one resolution, but the motion is to adopt the budget. I think I actually have it written down on the sheet as soon as the budget hearing is over, that specifies the appropriation categories.
So I guess Mike's question is the motion that you proposed on this agenda item that was in our packet, is that the one that's the same motion that was adopted by the budget committee?
This motion is much more generic.
Okay.
And so what we need to do is specify which one. So we have 3 choices here. The first one is the line item detail. Again, staff does not recommend that.
So it would be under options, Mike.
The second one.
Instead of looking at the draft motion, it would be.
The second one, option 2, does not include dollars allocated for a rate study. The third one does.
And the another problem is that there's material here that wasn't provided to us before this meeting. So the preferred choice is brand new.
Yeah, the preferred choice is brand new, and there's $100,000 difference in the materials and services category in the general fund.
Yeah.
That is the only difference.
Yeah.
So
But it
my
wasn't given to us
question, I
ahead.
have a couple questions for you. In regards to these green sheets, so you're requesting that the board, instead of adopting it as part of the budget, we make some sort of resolution to have it part of the financial reporting quarterly. Okay.
And it can be monthly as well, but it just, I don't think it will provide the same kind of information monthly, because we do have things that, you know, one month we might pay one bill, the next month we might pay 2. So it's gonna fluctuate a lot more.
But these are total amounts though.
Yes,
Even if
total
we're
amounts
doing
by line
months.
item.
Yeah, but even if we're doing monthly payments, it should still be below the total amount unless for some reason it's a one-time payment and it goes above.
Right. Right, it will tell you where we are by line item for the budget. But the appropriations at materials and services will tell you the total percentage of the budget that we have spent, and that's what we provide to you now.
In making the motion, we'll have to include which option it applies to. That'll have to be a part of the motion, not as it's written here. But I haven't seen this resolution amending the budget to include funding for the rate study,
So
so.
that's the new one that we just added today.
And so, I haven't had a chance to look at it.
The only difference is a $100,000 increase in materials and services in the general fund.
Oh, so it's
That is
a
the only change.
$100,000 increase to
Only change.
include that.
Yeah.
And in the other one, you were taking that from materials and services. or
Well,
something.
it's just not included, so if.
But
to
you
pay
were
for
going to
we
find
would-
it.
Yeah.
Is
Or
what
we
agreed
would
to
come back
do.
in with a supplemental
Yeah.
budget at the end of the year.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, I really feel good about your reporting by line item quarterly, and I would recommend at least quarterly. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Sterling and then Commissioner Holloway.
What concerns me is if you look at the resolution that's pink or red,
Orange?
Orange. Salmon.
Which one, salmon?
fuchsia, you count down 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. Would you read that short paragraph to us so as to confirm what the budget committee stated that they wanted to have?
Whereas the budget committee included cost of service rate study as part of the general fund professional and contracted services expenditure group.
Now, if we'll take and go to the one that the staff wants to take and put forth, would you read that same paragraph or statement that you just read from the pages of
Sorry,
the
which-
goldenrod?
Which paragraph are you on? On the salmon colored sheet, which paragraph?
The
is
third
it?
one.
I thought you said fourth, but okay.
And on this one, it says, whereas the Board of Commissioners amended the approved budget to include funding for a cost of service rate study. The rate committee approved the budget as presented and said that they wanted the rate study. This is saying that the board is making a change from the approved budget to include funding for the rate study.
So between the conclusion of the budget committee and their recommendation to provide or do the cost of service rate study, and now it's been discovered that there is no money for it, is that what you're saying?
I believe that that was discussed at the budget committee, that there was no money put aside for a rate study.
And that's even though the board instructed a rate study?
I recall hearing you said you would find it.
That's what I understand.
And because the budget was cut by $800,000, it probably could be done, but it is, to me, just as prudent to add an additional $100,000 expenditure, and we still meet our debt covenants.
please excuse me, Ms. Bright, but if you take 42.75% and load it onto the base rate, what does that figure come out to be? It comes out to be almost, how much?
The rate increase, which was a 14.25%.
No, I'm talking about Schedule A, ma'am.
Revenue increase, a 14.25% revenue increase. It comes out to be about an $800,000 revenue increase to the district.
But as Mr. Cardwell, Commissioner Cardwell so amply stated very clearly, I was snookered because the base rate is loaded with 42.75% rate increase, not 14.25.
$5 a billing cycle. And that was based on the rate committee recommending weighting the rate increase to the fixed fees to ensure that we have stability in our revenue.
Boy, you know, I looked, and you know, I'm not a rocket scientist, but this FCS people, I can't find anywhere where it says 42.75 to load on the base rate.
That was never said. We were looking for 14.25%. We were looking for $800,000 in revenue.
I have a question first, and then I'll do it. I have a question for you on the golden sheet, where it says, the fifth paragraph, this has to do with the rate study. It says, whereas the Board of Commissioners amended the approved budget to include funding for a cost of service rate study. Which approved budget are you speaking of?
The approved budget did not include additional funding for the rate study. So the approved budget are all the numbers that the rate or the budget committee saw.
So you're referring to the approved budget that the budget committee approved?
Yes. This goldenrod makes a change to that budget by increasing the materials and services by $100,000.
And reducing reserves, or, yes. Does that come from somewhere?
Commissioner Kemper?
Commissioner Sterling is correct that no place do they refer to a 42% increase. However, anybody who was present at the rate hearings, who read any of the materials, who participated in the rate hearing, should know very well that all along there was an increase in the base service charge of $6 a month. That's, well, actually, it would have been more if we had done what the rate committee wanted. But that increase was there, and it was stated during the hearings, during the meetings, that that's what the rate increase base service would be. So to now proclaim loudly that you got snookered seems really, really like you haven't been doing your homework.
Well, Commissioner Kemper, those words were not mine. Those were Commissioner Cardwell's.
I never said you were snookered. I said you
Just
weren't
play,
paying attention.
just play the recording
Go
back.
ahead, play it back. I never even said that word.
You said it, pardon me.
I think I heard Pat say she got
Your
snookered.
big mouth said it.
Commissioner Holloway?
Yeah, I freely confess, I got snookered.
See, that was her.
Really, Commissioner Kemper, or just address one quick comment to Ms. Bright. I don't recall that the rate committee has policymaking authority. I believe that resides in the board. And
It
so the
absolutely
rate
does. I was just bringing forward to the board with those attachments that clearly stated what the rates would be, bringing forward to the board the recommendation.
However, there were two members of the rate committee who strongly objected to
any
that
rate
proposal. And it was a staff decision to, according to the emails that we received, instructions to FCS to load the base rate. So I think the issue is that the board was never given the alternatives, and I freely acknowledge that I didn't do the arithmetic, and it never in my wildest imagination occurred to me that it was anything other than a 14.25% increase across the board. I had no, and it took me until
The
the end of that month to get the
rate committee
information.
is over. We're now on to the budget. Okay,
Well-
we're now on to the budget, so you.
No, the difference, the principal difference, folks, between.
I made the motion for that particular rate increase. You or Sterling seconded it. You both voted for it.
I know that, Barbara. I got stupid. I know it. I freely acknowledge it. I made no
Okay,
bones
so
about it.
we're moving on.
Okay.
Carol, I have a question
It's
for
very
you.
clear.
Yes.
So with option 3, because I clearly remember the rate committee saying that they wanted the rate study, and the board also approved it with the rate study. Where is that 100,000 going to come from?
With option 3, we have added it and reduced the ending fund balance from 2.4 million to 2.3 million.
Okay,
So that's what option 3 is. Option 2 does not.
And is it coming out of the reserve?
Yes, the ending fund balance of the general fund. Not dollars that are reserved for a specific purpose. This is,
Well, okay, so I guess with option 3, are we going to be pulling money out of our reserve account?
out of the ending fund. It's technically not a reserve.
And not
It's-
putting it back?
It's
Are
our
we going
capital
to
reserve
be
account. Yes.
spending it?
It's not our capital reserve account. It is just the ending fund balance of the general fund. This is the money that we have on hand so that at the beginning of the year, until we start receiving water payments, we can still pay our bills. And we have budgeted $2.4 million, I believe. 2.447, and so this proposal would reduce that to 2.347.
Bottom line, what it says is that we would be authorizing spending $100,000 more than was in the budget that was originally presented and the budget that the rate committee.
I understand that, but what I'm wondering is, are we pulling money out of the rate stabilization fund?
No.
Okay, that was my, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't state my question clearly.
This is
or
within the
correctly.
general fund, so the
So
rate
it's within the
stabilization fund
rate stabilization fund is not touched.
is not touched. The capital
Okay.
reserve fund is not touched. SDC monies are not touched.
Are not touched, okay.
This is from the ending fund balance of the general
Okay,
fund.
so we have the money there within the budget.
And
Not
if-
one way you can look at it is, we probably don't need to have $2.4 million in the ending fund balance, but it's nice to have that money so that we are sure that we can pay our bills should our billing be lower. But this is one-time expenditure. This is not an ongoing, we're not saying, we're gonna have to add this $100,000 to every budget year. This is a one-time expenditure to ensure that we get this cost of service rate study done and in place and determine that we're charging appropriate charges to our customers.
Thank you. Commissioner Holloway?
Mr. Moore was very clear that within the construct of the budget as it was approved, that he would, quote, find the money for the rate study. And
You
was-
found it.
Yeah, well, yeah, he found it, and basically, by
Well-
adding $100,000, that's not finding the money.
Well, and I-
Commissioner, excuse me just a minute.
Yeah?
When we had this discussion during the rate committee, this was after the board had already, what the direction from the board was, is come up with $800,000 to split the difference. When we got into the committee, I said, prior to the green sheet fiasco, I said I would find some way within the budget to pay for the rate study. Then Commissioner Holloway came in and had it added specifically in, which would actually make the reduction $900,000, which is different than what the board and staff, which is different than what the board had directed staff to do.
Because it's done by a certain category.
Right,
By
and
the
so,
motion.
so now
It's
if we
done
adopt the
by-
green sheet, you wouldn't even be able to do that.
To do the rate study.
If you appropriate it from the
Yes.
green sheet, then you couldn't do
Exactly.
that,
With-
because it's not a part of
So it's a
the things on
motion.
the list for $800,000.
So it's a motion that's not even really feasible.
Right.
Okay.
It would be quite
Commissioner
feasible.
Holloway and then Commissioner.
Right, it would be quite, you could do the same thing in the green sheet appropriations. It's exactly the same function. All you would do is add to the numbers.
Well, there's no rate study in the green sheets, and that's where you were saying.
What
that
you
the-
would do is add $100,000, if that's what we have to do, to consulting services in materials and services in the general fund, which is effectively where it's going to go regardless. Now, the difference between And I do think it's a bit, I think that it should have been provided to us as an alternative with the line item, rather than suggesting that with the line item budget, we could not include the rate study, because that simply is not correct. And the difference between these alternatives 1, 2, and 3, any of which could include a rate study, simply by adjusting that $100,000. The difference
No,
is
your motion stated it was to come from the professional services. That's what's on here. It says the rate study is part of the general fund professional contract services expenditure group.
Exactly.
Which is on page 2.
And
So you look at it, and rate study is not on here.
Commissioner.
And not only that, if you go to contract work, that would eat into our budget that was proposed by about little less than 50% of contract work for general fund services.
Okay,
And
Commissioner,
verify,
just, let me just answer this, please. That professional services includes contracting services. That is the line item amount that would be increased by $100,000
But
to
your
cover the rate
motion,
study.
but the budget committee motion did not include the 100,000 increase.
Well, the budget committee motion didn't include either of these alternates either.
That's why
Okay.
we were possibly
Okay.
considering them, because the motion that was adopted is not feasible.
It is
Okay.
feasible, all you need to do is
Okay.
add $100,000 to that line item.
Where would that come from?
Commissioner Holloway is correct. We can change any of the line items in the line item budget as well before it's adopted. I come before you with some options that we try to determine based on what we think the board might discuss and do. We obviously can't think of everything, even with the rate increase. We came to you with this option or another option at the board's request. We had 3 choices, the 28.5, the 14.25, or whatever the board says. I can't presume to know what's gonna come up. So Commissioner Holloway's right. If the board chooses option 1, you
But
can
then we
change.
have to find another 100 grand.
Well, you can
in our-
change a line item in here. You can increase a line item by $100,000.
And you reduce the ending fund balance,
Yeah.
just like you do with any other.
So that could easily be done if the
Okay.
board chose to go with the line item version.
Thank you. Commissioner Sterling?
The importance of this study is great. Would you not agree, Ms. Bright?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And am I correct in stating that we do not have a letter of engagement or an estimate or a list of particular entities that are intending to do this?
I think that might be something coming up at the next board meeting. I'm not sure. But we do want to start it as soon as we possibly can.
Well, it seems premature to start to take and remove or change or play magical cups with money until we have a letter of engagement. The board has received the appropriate documentation from the different entities that are going to take and come forward and do this, so they can evaluate the cost and make the determination. If it's going to be more than 100,000 or less than 100,000, we can take and appropriate the money at that particular time when we have the
And that would require
documents.
a supplemental budget. Now, I will say that we have spoken with FCS, as they are familiar with us, and said, if we were to do this, approximately how much would it cost? So we do have a very rough estimate, but we haven't certainly awarded a contract that has not been brought before the board.
Well, you
That's where
agreed
the
with-
$100,000 came from, though. We didn't just pull a number out of our hat.
You agreed with me that it's a very important item.
Absolutely.
And I think myself personally, that it warrants the attention of the Budget Committee. Those members are going to be back again next year. Some of them will be back again the year after that.
Hopefully it'll be
Because of the
done
level
by
of importance
the
of
next
this.
budget committee meeting. Should be finalized, should be a one-time expenditure. It shouldn't come before the budget committee again. We
Commissioner
need to adopt
Sterling.
a budget in order to issue a contract.
Yeah, we have to allocate the money
Now,
for next year now, or before June 30th.
And It's extremely, it's extremely difficult, Mr. Sterling, to go out and ask vendors to put together or respond to an RFP if you don't have appropriated dollars. Actually, it's almost borderline as being unethical, because we could come back. I mean, I just don't contract that way, you know, because we could come back and the board says, it's too much money, we don't like the terms and conditions. It costs small businesses a lot of money to sit down and do the government work, I mean, put together RFPs and those kind of things on the come without any assurance that there's funding for the work.
So option 3 includes the rate study.
Yes.
It does not include the green sheets.
The
but
green
board-
sheets will be part of the budget document.
Part of the budget document, but it will not affect,
appropriated at that level.
and that's option 3.
Yes.
Thank you.
The difference really is whether the board wants to be in the position of being able to understand if any of these appropriations are about to be exceeded and have the option to say halt on that, or move money around within our overall general fund. I mean, that's bottom line, that's the difference.
We'll still have that opportunity. It just won't prevent the organization from operating. And we won't have to have a supplemental budget, or have it, not a supplemental budget, but have it come back before the board to do a resolution to change that money around. But it will be brought back to the board. If the board sees something they do not like, they can direct staff at that time and say, you know, enough.
Well, I will tell you kind of my budget, my operating philosophy in handling the budget. When I got here, the first year I was here, it was not a budget that I had created. And sometimes as you create a budget, you think that, well, this item should be here. And then you get the bill and you realize what the work actually was, and you go, you know, it really wasn't appropriate to budget it there. It should be expended over here. And my theory has always been, let's expend it at the place that is the most appropriate, even if that means exceeding that particular line item, because we do develop the budget so that we know what the lines are. What that does for us, the benefit that gives us, is it gives us an opportunity in the next budget cycle to be more accurate. As I said earlier this evening, we are going to be within about $20,000 of our personnel services budget, combined CIP and general fund. We know how much it costs to have 39 employees here working full-time. Historically, we've had big returns of money in other areas. We are budgeting much more carefully and much more appropriately. We learn something every year. And I believe that every year I bring back to the budget committee and to the board a better budget. I'm really proud of the budget that we put together this year. I think we were very careful about where we thought we could spend money. We worked very hard to determine what areas we could do those cuts so that we could meet that $800,000 reduction in the budget that we brought forward to the board. You know, we're doing the best we can. I understand that you want more information. I am absolutely willing to provide more information.
Thank you. I'd like to take this time and, do you still have more
My next
presentation?
slide
Because I want
is-
to take public comment. Oh, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to take public comment, and then after public comment, if, I'm sure there's going to be more discussion amongst the board. So I will call people by the cards that I received in order.
Madam
David.
Chair, you do need to open the budget hearing.
I already opened the budget hearing. I
Yeah,
did,
we opened that
before the
before the
presentation.
Sorry.
That's okay. Because maybe I had it.
She did.
Okay, so David Blair, I have first, then Sue Taft, I believe, and then Cindy Lewis Wolfram.
I don't believe I said I wanted to comment on the budget. I was going to do 5 and 6, wasn't it? The 190 and the general manager's performance.
Okay. Sue.
Okay, well, I'm a novice, but my last position, I should say my name and where I live, am I supposed to stay?
You don't have
there?
to say where you
Okay,
live.
all right, good. Sue Taft. I have high respect for what you do. My last position was a group accountant at ODS, and it was a a low job compared to what you do with this. But I was laid off a year and a half ago, and I pretty much, when I come, I try to represent my children, my neighbors, people who are in positions as I. And as you're going through the budget, and I also want to comment that I think that we do all a lot better if there is respect on all sides, everywhere. Not interrupting one another, not whispering and making rude gestures and comments and faces.